You know what I'm constantly thinking about? I'm just fascinated thinking about the first person who looked at an artichoke and went, I can figure out how to eat that. Just get right into it. In my last video, which was in many ways my first video, I talked about how the democratic system in this country was never supposed to be an us versus them thing. And I wanted to go into what I believe are two psychological phenomena that contribute in some way to what has happened in recent years in this country, and not so recent years, honestly. Some of it has been building for a long time, which I'll get into. And this is going to end up being a series of videos. Again, I'll reiterate, made mostly for my own mental health. The void continues to exist. If you want something to look at besides me, you can also continue to listen to this, although I do occasionally include visuals in the void, or links or relevant info or definitions. But if you prefer to listen podcast style, I will continue to refer to you as if you exist. You know what I mean? Like it's just, even though I genuinely am making these videos for myself, it would be sad if I didn't at least like pretend to address a viewer or two, or a listener, as it may be. So, a couple disclaimers. Number one, I am not a psychologist. I am not a psychological professional in any way. I don't have a degree in psychology. I took AP psychology in high school, and I took some psychology courses in college, but mainly I'm just interested in the subject. But in this case, what I'm about to talk about doesn't require like a degree, and honestly I think it's more important that it's available to lay people like myself. It's accessible in that way. I will be expressing my opinions as always, just reiterating that I am not stating this. I'll talk about it like it's fact, because that's how people talk about their opinions. They pretend that they just sound like they're stating facts, because your opinion is a fact to yourself. It's a fact that it is your opinion. So if you disagree with me, that's okay, because anyway, and also I am fully aware that there are many other contributing factors to what is just the turmoil that is going on right now. But I want to talk specifically about, in this video, cognitive dissonance and the polarization effect that I learned about in high school. I want to start with cognitive dissonance. If you need a different example or definition, like I said, it's written out in the void so that you can Google it, because maybe I will explain it poorly and a more technical definition will be helpful to you, or there'll be a different YouTube video, TikTok, whatever it may be, that will explain it. But in my words, cognitive dissonance is when you're taking an action that your brain knows is wrong. It causes your brain to experience a kind of paradoxical existential crisis is the best I can say. Your brain struggles to reconcile its own actions or your own actions with the knowledge that it has. And in order to essentially make itself feel better, it will often find ways to change the narrative or justify its actions, your actions, in some way, so that it no longer feels this dissonance from doing something that it knows is wrong. And the example that we were given in school was smoking. In short, smoking is bad for you, but people do it anyway. And how do people justify that? But I don't know, like maybe you're a smoker. I don't want to judge right now. People vape, people smoke, it's not for me to say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you into story time, and I'm going to give you my own personal example. And every time I tell this story, which is not often, but I've told it enough times where I'm just like, it's pretty funny that I did not figure out I was neurodivergent until a couple years ago. because it's pretty, in retrospect, you know, hindsight is 2020. But also, I mean, the word autism, I don't think when I was in 5th grade, I mean, I'm sure it existed, but actually I'm not sure. I have to do research on it. I know Asperger's was like sort of being talked about at that time, but trust me, me getting diagnosed with ADHD and autism when I was in 5th grade or around that time would not have happened. The research just wasn't there yet, and girls having ADHD, it would have been called ADD, I suppose, at that time. That would have been like, whoa, no, that's a boy thing, for whatever reason. So I'm going to tell you a story about when I was in 5th grade, like I said. So I would have been 9 or 10, depending on if it was before or after December. I can't remember when this program happened, but we were subjected to, gifted with, you know, the D.A.R.E program, which I believe I was told was Nancy Reagan's baby, but I didn't research. Yeah. D.A.R.E, for those who don't know, is like, it's an acronym. It stands for drugs and alcohol rehabilitation, drugs are really excellent. Nope. Don't alcohol really exorbitant. Drugs against rehabilitating entrepreneurs. I don't know what it stands for. I keep wanting to say drugs and alcohol for the D.A, and then like I lose it in the R.E. I assumed I would just remember drugs, something education. I think the E might stand for education. I'm going to put the correct thing in the void. So even though I currently don't know what it stands for, it will be right there. Whatever it stands for, it's essentially a program where a police officer would come into your classroom and tell you not to do drugs and not to drink because it would make you a bad person. And so that's what happened. I was in 5th grade. And this woman comes into our classroom, and she is fully dressed in like her cop uniform, everything pressed and pleated correctly. She has her military style bun, you know, not a hair out of place. And I don't remember her name. This was 100 years ago, sorry. And she handed out workbooks probably. We had workbooks. They came from somewhere. Maybe our teacher handed them out. I'm just, you know, whatever. And she essentially told us, like, on day 1, like, if you do drugs, it will ruin your life, and also you'll get arrested. And only bad people do drugs, and here's how to resist peer pressure. When somebody tells you that you should huff paint with them, you tell them no, because your real friends wouldn't huff paint with you. Only fake friends do that. And me, the undiagnosed autist that I was, I just went, yep, okay, I'll never do drugs. And then there were more weeks, days of this program, and I was like, I don't get it. Why are we learning more about this? I've already understood that if you do drugs, a police officer will arrest you and you'll be a bad person and you'll go to jail forever. And also your brain will melt. Like, why are we still learning about this? I'm already on board, you know? I just didn't understand. I was like, why would anyone need more convincing than that, you know? By the way, if anybody is curious, it's pretty trippy and ironically probably more amusing while intoxicated in some way, but you should see if YouTube has any of those old D.A.R.E program anti-drug video, like cartoons that they showed, because they are wild, man. Like I still have the cartoon that I saw stuck in my head. Like it lives there rent free, just like 2 children going through the land of drugs, and there were all these personifications of different drugs like in monster form, and like marijuana was hilarious. And for the record, to this day I still haven't done a drug. Like I just but this leads me to a quick pause for another definition, or whatever you want to call it. Correlation does not imply causation. So for me, it is quite possible to say that the D.A.R.E program worked on me. But considering the type of person that I am, and the fact that just thinking about, you know, eating a pot brownie fills me with such anxiety that I think like it honestly puts me on the verge of a panic attack. You know, I probably was never going to do drugs. Like I don't think that the D.A.R.E program worked on me. I think it worked because I was already not going to do that. So there's correlation, right? I was in the D.A.R.E program, and now as an adult, I can say I've never done drugs, right? So there's correlation, and there's this kind of like need to leap to these things are causal, right? There's a consequence to this, in your mind, you want to say like, okay, so A caused B because A is correlated to B. But that's just not always the case, and it's something that's really important to remember. For instance, the people who are still saying that vaccines cause autism because their kids get vaccinated and then their kids get autism, right? It seems like a causal relationship. A happened, then B happened, therefore A caused B. But you can do that with anything. Like my kids have autism, so and I breastfed, so I can say breastfeeding causes autism, right? They also breathe. They were breathing for a couple years, and then they got diagnosed with autism. So I think that there's something in the air causes autism. So correlation does not imply causation, just means that like you can correlate a lot of things. You can, like you can be like, my mom did this while she was pregnant and now I'm like this. The two must be nope. You can just pull things out of the air and show a correlation between them. And that's why it's really important to prove causation. That's what scientific studies do. They make sure that the correlation is not just coincidence. And so, yes, I was in the D.A.R.E program, but I might just be a kind of, I'm just the type of person who doesn't want to, and that's fine. I'm still actually all for legalization of marijuana and changing the way that the penal system works when like crimes are drug related, like selling heroin to 5-year-olds, bad, right? Doing heroin in your own home, go to jail, like that kind of thing, right? I think rehabilitation and like strike systems and not including, thinking about it like alcohol, like if you are under the influence and you rob a bank, like, yeah, you should get punished, right? But if you're under the influence in driving, that's bad. You should be responsible with whatever you are imbibing. But a lot of times drugs are an addiction and that needs to be treated. That's all I'm saying. So, but I was not always like this. So in my 5th grade mind, I watched the videos, I did the workbooks. There really was an illustration, like the reference earlier, there was an illustration with speech bubbles. You had to fill in like your own speech bubble, like what would you say in this situation? And it really was like a little cartoon of a kid like with a can of spray paint or maybe something like that, going like, let's huff paint, and just like, what would you say to this person? And it's like, gosh, I don't know, maybe no, maybe that's weird, I'm in 5th grade, I don't want to breathe paint fumes, but whatever it was, they want you to say no to peer pressure, which is hilarious. Because one thing I discovered is that peer pressure often exists in your own mind, more than like outside. What I mean to say is, like, if I were to go to a party and not drink, I would think, oh man, everybody here is noticing that I'm not drinking when I was 15. Sorry, I didn't go to parties. But pretend that I was the type of person who got invited to parties when I was a teenager. And then, also pretend that I went after I was invited. And then I was at this party, where the kids were doing sex and drugs and rock and roll. And I wasn't drinking because I didn't want to do that. I would have been thinking more like along the lines of like, people are judging me. I should at least hold a cup so that people won't judge me, more than like anybody walking up to me and being like, hey, you're not cool unless you have this alcohol cup. Can you tell I've never been to a party? So anyway, 5th grade me heard that doing drugs was bad. Bad people do drugs. And I nodded, and I never did a drug. The problem was, we're going to learn about cognitive dissonance, right? The problem was that I also made the mistaken assumption that everybody else in that room with me, my fellow 5th graders, was also nodding and saying, yep, that makes sense. Doing drugs is bad. I will never do drugs. This is not problematic until I go to high school. Now, I went to the same school from preschool to 8th grade, so I never changed schools. going to high school, ninth grade, for me at 13 years old was the first time I'd ever changed schools. And it was different for me. There were a lot of new people, and I was afraid about making friends. And I was painfully shy and awkward. I know it's hard to believe. And also just judgmental. I was in my judgmental phase. I haven't gotten out of it. I've just been better about hiding it, I suppose. But I did meet a girl, in 9th or 10th grade who was pretty cool. I'm going to call her Kay because that was the first initial of her first name. And she was funny and very, chill, and like didn't seem judgmental of me. And, we weren't like friends, you know what I mean? Like we didn't like paint each other's nails and go to each other's houses and call and text each other. But, when we had free periods at the same time, we would hang in class, sit near each other. And I liked her, and then I don't remember who told me or how I found out, but basically I acquired the information that Kay sometimes spent her free time doing the marijuana. And I cannot describe to you this feeling that came over me of just, it was like a freezing sensation in my brain. I could not understand how that was possible, because I learned in 5th grade, again, I was neurodivergent, okay? Black and white thinking, like, all that. I learned in 5th grade that only bad people do the marijuana, but I liked Kay, and I thought she was a good person. So how could these two things be true at the same time? And it took a long time for me, like years. I didn't treat Kay differently. But like, I basically started compartmentalizing. So I just didn't think about it, essentially. I was like, no, I'm just going to think about her as like school chum Kay, and we're not going to think about the fact that she does the evil drugs. It took me years to be able to understand that what the D.A.R.E program, demonic alcohol resembles emus, had imparted upon me was actually pretty biased and incorrect and based on, I guess, Nancy Reagan's idea of like what the teens are into, and that people can do drugs and be good people, and people can do drugs and be bad people. It's that whole correlation thing. Sometimes people do drugs and are bad people, and that seems like one causes the other, and it's probably, not as causal as we think, right? Just because they do drugs does not make them bad. Just because they are bad doesn't mean they do drugs. There's all kinds of things, right? It took me years to get to the point where I could be like, yeah, it's fine. It's whatever. But the cognitive dissonance is essentially my brain had to either change the narrative. So I would have had to believe that Kay was actually a bad person, right? Which I could not do because I'd seen evidence that she was a good person. Or take in new information, which is essentially what I did over a long period of time. Or change the narrative a little bit too, is just like understanding that the information I've been given was biased back in 5th grade. And the reason that I'm talking about this is because cognitive dissonance resolves itself to make the brain feel better. And I have to believe, for my own peace of mind, that at some point, at least a couple people started to realize that Donald Trump was a bad person. People who had voted for him. And that, I believe, it's my opinion, would cause cognitive dissonance, because you don't want to believe that you would vote for a bad person, right? Like, you consider yourself a good person who wants the best for your country. And so to say, like, I, a good person who wants the best for my country, voted for a bad person, like, that could cause cognitive dissonance. And sometimes that resolved itself, as we saw with the most recent election, with people coming out and saying, listen, I voted for him in 2016. I made a mistake. I am not voting for him this time, right? So they changed they took the new information and changed it so that they were voting for a good person, resolving the cognitive dissonance, right? Or, well, a good person. Yeah. Anyway, the point is that they resolved it that way, right? I don't want to vote for a bad person because I see myself as a good person, so I will not vote for that person. I think other people change the narrative in other ways to make themselves feel better, right? Donald Trump isn't a bad person. The liberals are out to get him. They're lying. There's a conspiracy, right? I can see how this would happen, is all I'm saying, right? The brain protects itself in any number of ways that we probably still don't fully understand yet. It's a complex organ, right? And so I believe that could have happened, that rather than admit that they're wrong, which is hard to do, put a pin in that, they went a different route, or their brain went a different route, and doubled and tripled down, right? No, I didn't make the wrong decision. He's not a bad person. Other people are wrong. Other people are bad. It has the same effect. There's multiple routes to resolving cognitive dissonance for your brain, right? It's just, that's how it depends on the person, I suppose, or the circumstances, for how people resolve that. The other thing I wanted to talk about real quick, and this is just like my memory of a study, is polarization. And like I said, it's just my memory. I'm gonna look it up after this and put some links in the description if you're looking for like more specifics on the study. The reason I didn't look it up is because I'm worried I'm not going to be able to find it. And so it's like, if I can find it, yay. If I can't, I'll link to the closest I can. But it was basically like this one study that I learned about in high school. We had this little like booklet, honestly, of like psychological studies. It was really cool. We learned about a lot of fun stuff, and some not so fun stuff. It turns out that ethics in psychology, it wasn't always there. So if you have a strong stomach for animal torture, you can look up learned helplessness, because that also feels relevant right now. But big warning, animal torture. And child abuse in the form of, I think his name is Baby Albert, and being forced to be afraid of Santa Claus. So I'll put links to, I may or may not put links to that. Like I said, it's grim. And then eventually ethics happened, and we have to reconcile ourselves to the fact that like there's a lot of good information we learned from really bad scientists. Anyway, so here's how I remember it. And again, I'm fudging it a little bit, but the basics are going to be the important part. And I might be fudging it a little bit also to make it fit more with the narrative of politics. For instance, researchers got some volunteers for this study. One of the important ways to get good information from your psychological study is to lie to the people you are studying, and so you tell them that they are being studied for thing A, and you're actually studying thing B. But then, like, after the study's over, you tell them like, hey, just so you know, we were actually studying this, and that helps to clear things up. So for this, we'll say that people were told that they were just going to be like, participating in team events to see about like how teamwork works, right? Or something like that. And they were at random put into two groups. I'm going to call them the red group and the blue group. And then they were given tasks, right? I don't remember if there's a point system or what the tasks were, but basically they were competing against each other. The red team and the blue team, right? And what the scientists, the researchers observed is that the more time went on, the more the teams became more insular within each other. So the red team became more, yeah, red team, and the blue team became more, yeah, blue team. And then it became like blue team, yes, red team, no. Like blue team became anti-red team, and red team became anti-blue team. And you can think about this too. Like you can imagine yourself in this situation, like right at the beginning, you're meeting a bunch of strangers. You might hear somebody say like, yeah, go blue team, kind of ironically or whatever. But by the end of, days or hours, however long it took, you have people saying, yeah, go blue team, like more sincerely. And what they observed was essentially a polarization of these two teams. So they started out just like two groups of strangers who had been randomly assigned to a team, and they were just like, yeah, sure, let's try. And then by, as more and more time passed and more competition ensued, they pulled farther and farther away from each other until it suddenly became like an us versus them dynamic. And that is why, among many other reasons, right? And that's a very watered down, boiled down version of that. Like I said, you can definitely look into the actual study that was done. I'm hopefully going to find the one I'm talking about right now so I can link to it. But it's polarization, right, is the idea, because again, you get two poles, right? North and south, or whatever it may be, or in this case, red and blue. If you look at Republicans and Democrats right now, this polarization has been a long time coming and has been getting increasingly severe and intense for years. And it does not help that each team has its own color and its own mascot. We've even got mascots, like teams, like sports teams. And you see online anyway, and I take all that with a grain of salt, or two or three, because, online there are trolls and there are people who say one thing but, act completely differently in real life. But you see online a lot of people saying that they don't care what happens at this point to the country as long as liberals are upset about it. And that is, I believe, in my opinion, a result of the polarization that's been going on for years. It's not about a population of people living in a country who are working together for the common good anymore. It is about two teams fighting and trying to one-up each other. And it is not helped by the current system, the two-party system, which has literally put people in teams. You have to register for what team you're in, right? And I know that there are third parties, but mostly those third parties exist to detract from the two main ones, right? I mean, an independent voter knows that they're not exactly going to get their Green Party, I think it is, person elected. They know, right? And that's their right as a voter in a supposedly democratic system. But one thing I learned in history class is that George Washington warned against having political parties. I think, again, history was not my best subject, but this is the culmination of it. I hope. If this isn't the culmination of it, we have other worries, right? If this polarization process is not exactly, if it hasn't run its course, and the two teams are going to pull farther and farther apart, it's going to get even worse. And we need people to realize this. We need people to realize what has been done to them psychologically. That they've been, there's some differences, like, they chose their team as opposed to being randomly assigned, but that they've been put in a system that kind of like pits them against other Americans, other people who are supposed to be on their side. And one of my, I don't subscribe to like a ton of conspiracy theories, but one of my fun conspiracy theories is that politicians and the people who are leading this country and the people who are secretly leading this country want us to be infighting as much as possible, which is why after decades and decades and decades, certain issues are just not resolved, right? Gun control, abortion, certain educational things as well, like the education system, because this is definitely like, I have no evidence. It just feels like this, right? Number one, if there are single issue voters out there, all a politician has to do on any side is like go out and say like, I am anti this or I am pro this, and they've just secured a huge chunk of voters. Super easy for them. And two, because these are such divisive issues, we are infighting. So instead of the entire population of the United States of America being able to unite against what the real problems that are rampant. My dog is sneezing. They're busy fighting with each other. And so there's no worry for the people who are in charge. that we're going to viva la revolution or anything like that, because we're too busy fighting with each other. And I think they like that. And so I think that there's, again, this is just my thought, but like, I think there's some deviousness to the fact that these issues still exist, right? I think that there's some purposeful pulling back from ever resolving certain things, entirely. And to be fair, Roe v. Wade was supposed to, but like, people still talked about it, right? Even though it was resolved. I've done a lot of air quotes this time. I don't know how I feel about that. But like, I think that there is definitely some deliberate backpedaling and, towing the line without ever crossing it, all that, just to make sure that those single issue voters are still easily snapped up, and also to make sure that we keep fighting with each other so that our focus is on the other side and not on the people standing on their tall metaphorical towers looking down upon us and, I don't know, twirling their mustaches or whatever. So it's just a thought. But next time on Dragon Ball Z, I want to talk about how difficult it is to admit you're wrong. And when I say you, I mean me too. I mean, I suck to this day at apologies. And I think that there's something to that. So I want to talk about that too. But for now, what am I supposed to say? Like and subscribe? You don't have to do that. It's fine. You can comment if you want. Tell me I'm wrong. That's fine too. You can say you heard my dog sneeze and that this is unprofessional. I should be editing out all dog sneezes. So yeah. Just some thoughts.